Much everyone who's joining the Long Travel Scale of Solar Reports 2025. Here with us today, we have Ronan Power, who's the CEO of Solar Ireland. We have Declan Cullinane, who is the chair for the board of directors in the association. We have Andrew Dunne from ESB, and we have Wang from Green Collective. Ronan, I'll pass it over to you so you can start.
Thanks, Priscilla. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today for the launch of our 2025 Scale of Solar Report. I'm really sorry that I'm not going to be able to deliver the messaging myself today. We had a bit of a disaster traveling, so I'm currently still in transit. But I'm deputizing to Declan, who's going to bring all of you guys through some of the messaging from the report. I think what's really, really important to take out of this is that we've had a huge amount of growth over the last number of years. We're up about 160% in deployment, and we're now moving into the deployment phase where we're likely to see something along the lines of about 1 gigawatt per year being deployed onto the network. This is an absolute achievement and something as an industry I think we should be very, very proud of. The theme for this year is building generation for generations. And the most important thing to take away from that is that these assets are going to be deploying renewable energy into the market over the next quarter of a century. It's bringing huge amounts of employment to our industry and contributing meaningfully to the climate action targets of 2030 of 8 gigawatts. So rather than rabble on, I'm going to pass you over to Declan, who's going to bring you through some of the more detail in the content, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, take care. Thanks, everybody.
Super. Thanks so much, Ronan. Really appreciate that. As Ronan said, it's an exciting time in the market, a huge growth projected, and actually historically, you can see here from the graph of where we are from 2023 levels to now. But we'll go through all this detail today. We'll have a live Q&A session as well at the end for any questions. So please put forward any questions through the system for that, and it'll be picked up by our team. Happy to pick up any things during the day. We have some excellent experts between Faye and Andrew online, and it's an opportunity for you to query some of the aspects and the numbers we have coming through here as well. So to kick it off, as Ronan said, the scale, I guess, just maybe back one slide there a second, Priscilla. The scale as we have right now is enormous. 160% growth is a phenomenal growth over the last number of years. And that's driven by not just the utility scale, it's domestic scale, it's through to the commercial rooftop in terms of the businesses as well. So it's a huge part of play for across all of the industry in a wider sense. 1.7 gigs is what we have at the moment, which is a startling number when you think of where the industry started from a number of years ago. That the power of people's perception of solar in terms of the domestic level, the number of houses and homes right now, we're saying over 140,000 homes, which Ronan mentioned earlier on as well, that have solar on the rooftops, which is a drop in the ocean, really, in the terms of scale of what's the opportunity in the market. But when you had a starting point not so long ago of only maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago of people considering solar, now it's mainstream. Now it's a view of that it's just a normal thing to do for domestic level. As you can see from some of the data we have here as well, 2 gigawatts is what the plan is to be by the end of the year, by September, which is immense. The breakdown, that 1.7 gigs, if you look at a large section of that, is we have some very large utility scale, but microgen is from a domestic level, 5, 7 to 6. That's an amount of energy which we wouldn't have believed a number of years ago to have that kind of level of growth and growing more again. So that is just growing and growing and growing from a point of view of all of the domestic level. Commercial rooftop is growing also as well. But utility scale in I guess the categories of sub 5 and larger, there's an immense amount of projects that are coming through on the bars and the systems, and we'll talk through some of the areas around that is growing as well. I guess looking at the numbers in more detail in terms of the powering of homes, carbon offset, the generation we have here from the amount of generation actually that drives that, drives a community benefit funds through to reduction in energy in households. It has a knock-on effect. Schools, GA clubs, the number of avenues that this is being benefited from is immense. The res-backed community benefit funds, be it you're in res or out of res, I think a lot of developers certainly want to support that to make sure that there's investment in local communities. Excuse me. And the scale of the projects themselves. On some of the larger projects, one of the big elements that larger scale developments want to achieve is a biodiversity net gain as part of the projects as well. So it's important for all of those larger projects to prove in planning that there is a benefit of that in a biodiversity net gain, but also as well as being tracked and targeted, that is an inherent element and a benefit of the project. The 370,000 homes, just to pick up on that point, that is it's a number which we didn't believe would be achievable a number of years ago. I think as we all entered into the solar industry, we're all trying to find opportunities for on a utility scale or commercial rooftop scale. The market has evolved an immense amount, from a point of view of the off-takers on a domestic level. Even my own solar at home, my own house, the amount of opportunities you have with different suppliers vying for that opportunity to work with you for the domestic level. And that will continue to grow. We see no slowing down in that trend. We see no slowing down in the number of potential suppliers in the market from a domestic level. And also as well, I think the supports that are from government, as an industry, we will continue to lobby for both domestic, for commercial, and for utility scale continuously, and we will continue to discuss with government to make sure that the focus is still on all three fronts, if you want to look at that in that sense. So it's important we keep that on track. Why it matters, if you look at investment, we had the KPMG report last October ahead of the conference in the RDS. We talked about a lot of these numbers, what's the scale and what's the potential outlook from that. And then the numbers here are staggering, and to pick up a couple of things, around 7,000 jobs, so we're saying between 5.4 and 7.1 in terms of the number of jobs that are created from the industry. And that's across all fronts. That's across the early stage ecology, and design of sites, the development teams involved in that, the grid assessors, the planning assessment teams, the installers, the domestic level, the utility scale level, the installation crews through to ESBN networks or air grid networks in terms of trying to ramp up the teams to manage that as well. There's an immense amount of growth in the industry that then has obviously the knock-on effect of those large-scale projects, smaller projects, or even growth of jobs, bringing through business rates for local communities, and then also as well the funding and tax from PAYE or any other community benefits that come from that as well. So 500 million was a number which was a view that was being generated from that, which is as a growth again. I look back to 23 or 22, 21. It's amazing to see that level of investment in that sense. I might just roll through now to the next slide in terms of the generation aspect of it, and maybe bring in Faye on the next two slides. So Faye, you might just walk us through your thoughts on this.
Sure. Thanks, Declan. Hi, everyone. My name is Faye Wang, and I'm an analyst and co-founder of Green Collective. And one of our main objectives is to make publicly available Irish grid data more accessible and engaging. So just a few notes. All the numbers I'll be talking about over the next few minutes are all island data. So even though despite being two jurisdictions, is technically one grid. So all these numbers represent the entire island of Ireland. And Another thing is just because so we collect data from publicly available sources such as AirGrid, ESP networks, as well as single electricity market operator. But just because they're publicly available doesn't mean they are easily accessible. So hopefully all these visualizations will make the trends quite clear. And I also want to thank Solar Ireland and Priscilla for the opportunity to contribute to this report again this year. And one of the key metrics we track is total generation from all the solar farms. And if you can walk it through with me, the top right chart with the blue and red bars together. So those represent monthly total generation from all solar farms in Ireland. The blue parts represent June 2023 to May 2024 from left to right. And the red parts represent same months, but June 2024 to May 2025. So as recent as last month. I don't need to explain much. You can see a clear jump year over year between these two colors. And I think on average, it's about 70% increase in terms of monthly solar generation from large scale, utility scale solar farms. And last year, our record was from July 2024, which reached 127 gigawatt hour. That was a record at the time, but that was broken as early as April this year. And again, last month, and I'm fully expecting the current June record will be the new record going forward. And another metric we track, which is in the bottom chart with the yellow and green bars. So like I said, the last chart was the total generation over a month. But the bottom chart represents, think about it as a snapshot of the system output at a time. So that's measured in megawatt. So we look at for each month, what is the peak solar output from all the solar farms on the island? And the yellow parts, again, represent June 2023 to May 2024, and the green parts represent June 2024 to May 2025. And again, a huge jump year over year. And I think it's quite remarkable, actually, as of last month, at one point, more than 21% of island demand at that time on May 18th at 1:45 p.m. was met by utility scale solar. And considering the first utility scale solar farm in the Republic of Ireland was connected in the first half of 2022, that has been quite a progress and increase since then. So it is really remarkable to see this represented kind of year over year. And actually, as we speak, in terms of new records, yesterday already saw a new record of peak solar output on June 19th at about 1:30 in the afternoon. So I know we're all experiencing this a little bit of heat wave right now. So as we speak, there might be a new record. So I'll keep an eye on it. Maybe there will be a new update by the end of this webinar. We'll see. Fingers crossed. So if you could go to the next slide, please, that'd be great. Thank you. And so all the numbers I talked about earlier are system level, but we also look at solar farm level generation. So the map you're seeing on the screen right now represents different solar farms. Each bubble represents one asset, and the size of the bubble represents how much they have generated from June to May over the last 12 months. And as you probably can see, there's a cluster and concentration in Meath, and even though it looks like Dublin, but it's essentially all Meath. And in fact, Meath, Cork, and Wexford together represent about 70% of utility scale solar generation. And some of you might see some solar farms might be missing. Maybe you have a local solar farm that you're like, where's the bubble for that? That's probably because the missing solar farms are on a smaller scale. So if you're less than 10 megawatt, you're not required to register with the market operator. Hence, that particular generation data is not publicly available. And I just want to end my segment with maybe not a gap, but more like hopefully this missing piece will be completed in the future. As Declan has mentioned, there is a huge amount of micro generation capacity on the island. So if we want to see rooftop solar being added to this map, there will be so many more smaller bubbles popping up everywhere. And one of the things we did look into, because that particular number, how much generation from micro generation or rooftop solar or behind the meter solar, however you want to call it, is feeding back to the grid. That information is actually not publicly available. One way we wanted to kind of assess the impact of that large group of generation assets is to look at the impact on demand, especially the impact on demand during the day. So we looked at the past Aprils from 2019 to 2025. So just for the month of April, since that's when we see solar starts performing well each year once it reaches a certain scale. So we look at the demand curve throughout the day and look at during the day that demand really has peaked in 2022. And since 2023, 2024, 2025, there has been a consistent decrease in demand during the day. But if you look at demand during early evening hours, that has been increasing. So that really shows that the impact of rooftop solar, the fact that customers are using that for self-consumption and some of it probably feeding back to the grid, is becoming more and more obvious. And I just want to end at that note. And if you have any questions about the data, you have more questions about particular trends, feel free to add your questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll pick it up at the end of the session. I'll hand it back to Declan.
Thanks, Faye. I'll definitely have a few questions at the end of that in any case, so there'll be a few things we can pick up on. But it's that's immense figures, and just looking through the 6.5% of total demand in May is an immense milestone. 21% on a given day and a given time period, but it's still, it harks back to a previous era of mine in wind. When wind was small scale and growing in the market as well, when there was always thermal generation and wind was starting to penetrate in that sense of scale. It almost like a bit of deja vu. Look at this again as we see the immense growth of solar. We might come back to that earlier on in terms of some of the challenges that will bring, of course, as well from an infrastructure basis. Andrew, I might give you the floor to make chat through from your side.
Yeah, thanks, Declan. Andrew Dunne, as you know, is my name. I'm a project director for a number of solar farms with one that our ESB are managing, including Bullstown Solar Farm, where that picture was from there. Now, Bullstown was recently energised, and it's the first wholly owned ESB solar farm to be energised. Now, it's relatively small compared to a lot of other projects which have been developed by people on this call, probably, and even ones we're doing ourselves. Like it's just 8.42 megawatts over a 44-acre site just south of Ashbourne there in County Meath. However, it's a good project to kind of dip our toes in the water with to get started, because it's a new technology for us, and we took the learnings from that into future and our larger projects which we're working on now. Now, obviously, we came across the usual challenges that everyone on the call will be familiar with. It's a new technology. We're using new contractors who are both new to Ireland and new to us. So getting everyone on the same page was a bit of a challenge at the start. And there's the usual procurement and supply chain issues, and of course, grid connection issues, which we're all familiar with. There were a few positives with it. The community liaison, as it's mentioned in the slide there as well, that was a one successful point which I'd like to emphasise. There was a lot of concern at the start of the project regarding deliveries, especially with solar, with all the panels, all the piles, the concrete, the stone, even for a site of only 44 acres. And again, you can imagine what that would be for a much larger site. There's a lot of concerns among the local regarding traffic, and especially deliveries on a it's a narrow road, but it's a busy road, and there's kids using this for cycling up and down. And there's a couple of equestrian centres close by who have horses on that road for road training as well. So, but they were all managed successfully. And also regarding the equestrian centre, which I mentioned, the landowner there was quite concerned regarding impact on his thoroughbred horses with the construction works going on, because apparently horses are creatures of habit, and have to see something strange that they're not used to, they can be flustered by it. So we put up temporary screening which blocked their view and numbed the sound a bit as well of all the piles going in, and that was successful as well. So overall, the community engagement on Bullstown went fairly well. A couple of other positives as well. It was the first use of SFX, I always struggle saying that, switchgear in PEC modules for an ESB project. So that leads to sustainability benefits as well. And also, speaking of sustainability, the site is planted with native wildflowers throughout the site to enhance the biodiversity of the site, which again is positive both for us and for the community and the environment. So I said Bullstown, it's only 8.5 megawatts, but it was getting our foot into the game as such. But it's onwards and upwards after that now. Now across Res 2, 3, and 4, we have about 420 megawatts plus that are either in construction or about to enter construction. About 100 megawatts hopefully going live by the end of the year. Beyond that, as some of you might be familiar, ESB has a net zero strategy by 2040. And so for Res 5 and beyond, we have a pipeline of about 1.5 gigawatts of solar at various stages of development. Some of land, some of planning deals, whatever, the usual. But there'll be some attrition on that, of course, so not all of that will be built. But solar will be a major part of the ESB strategy going forward, and Bullstown's 8.5 megawatts led the way. So yeah, that's a brief history of Bullstown. Thanks.
Very good, thank you, Andrew. It's it's great, and I understand actually just from that photograph is up there. I understand that's the full family of generations.
It is. That's 3 generations there. Thomas, the landowner, his wife, and his daughter there, and then 2 of her kids. Yeah.
Very good, and it's interesting to see that as Ronan mentioned at the start of the call, generations for generations. It was a theme we were looking at for this year's conference as well, and obviously for this too. But this is a great impact on that in a sense that it's that all the history of the family involved.
And just sorry to interrupt you there, Thomas as well. Like he's gone fully green now. Like since this came along, he's put solar panels on his roof as well. He's bought an electric car. So I'd like to think the solar farm has influenced his decisions on that as well. So yeah, that's good. More positives as well. Yeah.
Excellent. That's excellent to hear. Thanks so much for that, Andrew. That's great to understand more about it. And look, ESB have done an immense amount over the last number of years in terms of delivery of projects. And whilst this is a modest 8.7 megs, I think it was, but that's the building blocks of the projects that started at the early stages, and obviously some larger ones, some smaller ones, and that's just the nature of all projects right now. So it's great to see the growth of it and see some of the history behind it too as well. I'll come back to you in a moment on when we have this Q&A in relation to some of the kind of community engagement elements and maybe the strategy on that. So I guess looking at some of the points I mentioned earlier on, we were talking 140,000 homes. If we look at that in a sense of potential that is within the Irish market, there are, as mentioned in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, about 1 million rooftops that would be suitable for this. So we're tapping into less than 14% of that at the moment. And leaning on maybe what Faye was talking about earlier, the demand profile, the generation profile is shifting and changing. We're seeing more and more of that domestic level generation, self-consumption at a house level. The traditional profile of morning and evening demand is certainly starting to smooth, I think, in any case, and I think that's going to continue. And as we look at that scale of number of houses that have rooftop solar, that will continue to grow over the next number of years. The estimated run rate from our analysis in the market is about 40,000 homes per annum over the next number of years. So as an average, so that's substantial growth. That's substantial growth, and I think that will continue. Of course, as I mentioned earlier on, all the other elements are important to make sure that there's enough contractors in the market to do that. There's enough attractive benefits for domestic level to do that. But I think if you look at the cost of solar now has declined so much in a domestic sense from what it was, say, 10 years ago. It's immense to see that. From a commercial basis, I guess, just looking at that section there, maybe just go back one slide again. Thanks so much, Priscilla. Commercial basis, we're looking at that is still a huge sector, and it still is growing. I think the domestic level is growing a lot swifter because of the scale, I guess, of maybe a 5 kilowatt scale. But we're still seeing substantial growth in mini generation and the commercial rooftops as well. So it's really, really positive to see it across all fronts. And I guess from the overall targets that we have in the market, you know, it is combined of all of those elements of domestic utility and commercial and microgen across it all. So it's again, our 1.7 gig number we had at the very start, you know, that will continue to grow. 2 gigs is what is planned by September. So we'll watch this space. And I'm sure by the end of this week, Faye, we might have a different top trumps number in terms of the percentages on the day. So we'll watch out for that. So this is an interesting part, I guess, to discover where the market's going to go, and it's hard to predict something like this because it's, you know, we're having growth of demand, growth of generation across all fronts. We have novel technologies evolving. If I may pick up a couple of things, I guess obviously solar and storage are very, very compatible. There's a huge amount of opportunity for those from a hybrid basis to work well together. We see immense amount of opportunity for standalone storage in locations as well, but you know, solar and storage will be naturally compatible given the scale that we have and using that and dispatching that energy as and when demand is needed in the later hours of the evenings when the sun does set. I'll come back to that point in a second, but maybe even something that's being explored more in the market that is maybe more prevalent in other markets. In the bottom right-hand corner, we talk about floating solar. You know, to look at that, we already see great opportunities of that being deployed in the more leisure waters, I would say, in Holland. Where there is some smaller scale projects in terms of you know, maybe 1-2 megawatt scale projects in comparable to a utility scale project that is being rolled out more and more across some of those locations, making use of water bodies. Floating solar is a technology that's been advancing over the last number of years, and I think there's a part to play for that in the Irish market as well, in certain reservoirs that might be suitable. Points of connection, obviously, you know, and those aspects in terms of viability need to be checked. It does come with some challenges from a construction basis. It's more expensive, and it comes with a few of some challenges in terms of the route to market for that as well. You know, and if we look at route to market for a floating solar opportunity, absolutely, it would be a bit more challenging in terms of the cost profile for that compared to a traditional utility scale project. But that, again, that's where the evolution of the technology is going to go, and I think we'll see more and more of that over time. Specifically on storage, I guess we're seeing this more and more. We know policy changes that happen for that to enable it. We're seeing that happening already, and again, our team within Solar Ireland and is working closely with Energy Storage Ireland as well in a lot of our lobbying efforts to look at the privatization of projects, looking at the opportunities for us to work in harmony together. You know, we have seen some consultations over the last 6-12 months that we've been lobbying for and change for, and we've seen some positive movements on all fronts. And I think, again, it's just logical where this is going. We're going to see more and more of that interlink between the two technologies together. So, and again, some of the points we see, as mentioned, from a floating basis, there's new novel technology, agri, solar. There is different opportunities in that as well, from partially translucent panels through to vertical farming in an agri sense as well. So there's novel techniques that are happening across all fronts, more on an auto production basis than a utility scale, let's say, exporting to the market. But again, it just shows that there's a part to play for it across everywhere. And we're seeing a real step change in how the technology is being used.
Declan, if I may just jump in for a moment to
Sure.
kind of hammer in this point about the interconnectedness between solar and battery behavior we're seeing on the island of Ireland right now. Since solar has reached a certain scale, and especially on days with strong solar performance or moderate, as long as not too weak wind, which means the island does not need as much gas fossil fuel generation, that leads to generally lower wholesale prices in the market. And we usually see batteries when they participate in wholesale trading, they charge during hours of really low prices and discharge it and sell it to the market during peak hours where prices are really high. And traditionally, because batteries on the island of Ireland, a lot of the revenues come from ancillary services. Essentially, they just need to be available to be called on by the grid operator to respond to grid issues. So they need to be really fast, and they can do that, and they're very good at doing that. But there has been a policy change last year in October 2024, where the incentives for batteries from ancillary service have been decreased. So since then, we've been seeing more batteries participating in wholesale trading. So the buy low, sell high type of activity. So we're seeing more batteries actually charging during the day when prices are low, and also when solar is producing more. And it's not just batteries. Actually, for Turlock Hill, the iconic hydro pumped storage system in Ireland, for the first time in April, at the end of April, excuse me, there was a stretch of strong solar days and moderate wind. We actually saw Turlock Hill charging during the day for the first time ever. We always see it charge it during the middle of the night when demand is low and power prices are low, but now we're seeing that shift in behavior as well. So that really shows how solar and wind can complement each other to reduce that reliance on fossil fuels. And once we have more solar and wind on the system during the day, we also see battery behavior change as well. Not only to take advantage of the lower prices, at the same time, that also indicates lower carbon emissions and cleaner electricity fueling these batteries as well. So it's really a win-win situation all around. So I just want to kind of emphasize at that point, and that's a new behavior we've seen as recent as a few months ago.
Thanks, Faye, for that brilliantly. I think it's amazing just the step changes happening in technologies and step changes happening in generation profiles and how we're operating. Even Turlock Hill, as you say, the pump storage. It's clear that the impact what solar is having, the growth over the last number of years, as we all have seen, up to 1.7 gigs just now, and that will continue to grow as we mentioned over the next number of years. But we're only at the beginning of that impact. We're seeing that happen, and that positive impact happening across the board, across not just a domestic level in our own pockets, our own household bills, through to the benefits of business, plus as well traditional generation being positively impacting that as well. So which is watch this space. I suspect we'll see what happens with it. So yeah, I guess 2030 targets. We often talk about that. Government talks about it. We, as an industry, this is at the forefront of our minds. We are driving as much policy change to enable this as we possibly can. I guess our team within Solar Ireland are very much focused on two objectives, communication and policy. Communication of the biggest issues, trying to drive that change, and then underwriting policy or responding to consultations to try and make that change. And the biggest part of that is 8 gigs. How do we get there? There's a long road to go there by 2030. We have hopefully 2 gigawatts on the bars by the end of the year. Should be by September, we think, but let's say by the end of this year in 2025, and growth of that each year. We need a minimum of 780 megawatts each year, probably by, I would hope we're more towards the upper end of the range we're expecting of 1.3 being added each year, which is a substantial challenge, not just for developers, not just for EPC contractors, but obviously from an infrastructure basis to try and connect that volume of projects over the next number of years. We're now in 2025, 5 years to go to get towards that target. There is a drive from all developers to try and get those projects connected as soon as possible. We're seeing some challenges in the market in terms of supply chain. We're seeing some challenges in terms of change in technology. And one of the things that Andrew mentioned there of changing switch gear to SF6.3, so which is again just a step change of requirements that would have knock-on effects that you wouldn't have anticipated. So a lot of those elements that have a challenge for someone like Andrew and the team from a project management basis to try and keep things on track. The res, I guess res schemes have been ultimately a huge catalyst for the market to make sure that we've grown to where we are today, and long it may continue. You know, we understand there is state aid approval discussions ongoing to continue the res auctions, and the res scheme beyond what is here today. There needs to be something in place to ensure that there is still growth in the market until it finds its own 2 feet. You know, the corporate PPA market is, from a utility scale, is very active, and I would say there's a huge amount of parties in the market that do want to procure power from sites, but having the benefit as a dual stream of either going through res or corporate scenario for projects, you know, it enables the projects to have optionality. It enables the projects to make sure that they can continue. And I think as well, you know, from a domestic level, that competition is very much there as well. You know, people are now more clever in terms of shopping around of when they're doing PV for their houses, who will they go with? And the competition is there, be it any of the incumbents and as off-takers of electricity suppliers to new entrants into the market. And we're becoming more investable, we're becoming more attractive. And I think that's all very positive signs of growth. I guess the main drivers that are talking through this there, you know, hybridization is going to be a big part of that. Rooftop is going to continue to grow. I mentioned that we're looking at 40,000 houses per year as the run rate we believe, or we hope at least, will continue. Grid reform, many aspects of that need to be done from a policy basis through to obviously infrastructure. And we'll pick up a couple of those points in a moment as well. But the right policies in place to make sure that we enable storage to continue, we enable swift installation, we enable the infrastructure to carry the grid that we need to do. We need to deliver the power to where the demand is. And it's interesting, going back to Faye's graph from earlier on of Ireland, to see the generation point. I might just bring you on this a second, Faye, just for a point, and Andrew as well. On that generation map, if you look at, you know, Cork, Meath and Wexford combining together to give almost 70%. But, you know, if you're overlaying a generation map versus a demand map, you know, it'd be interesting to see where that is. I'm sure you've seen that from your own analysis you've done as well. And maybe just picking up the point you said earlier around the profile being shifted in terms of domestic level. Would you mind just maybe talking through your thoughts on that a bit more again?
Yeah, sure. So I think obviously a lot of the demand is concentrated on the east side. So solar being very much on the east side of the country, having that access to transmission infrastructure to go into large demand centers of Dublin and Cork, that's a good thing. And we see wind running into dispatch down issues. So for those of you on the call maybe not familiar with this, dispatch down essentially called curtailment elsewhere. In other markets, it's essentially when generators are asked to reduce output, when either there's a system level issue not being able to take on more generation, or there's a local constraint issue of not having enough transmission infrastructure to take on as much availability these generators are providing. So we do see that wind experiencing more severe dispatch down issues, but also at the same time it's just much larger scale than solar at this point. And but for solar, I have noticed if you just look at Republic of Ireland, depending on the month, again, I'm looking at data from AirGrid. These are 15-minute data. They really break down what the reason behind each time periods dispatch down cause is. And it's kind of a fluctuation for solar. Sometimes it's because of system level issues fall under the category of curtailment. This could be the system needs to keep a certain number of fossil fuel generation on minimum number and to avoid high frequency issues on the grid. So they have to turn down some of renewables. And since it's more system level, so once we have issues like that, almost all the units will be affected. And sometimes you also see solar farms experiencing constraints issues. So for solar farms, I feel like it's half and half. So I guess the solution would be, one, build more it's easy to say, we need more grid infrastructure to actually get these available resources into the demand centers. And I think it's important to say Ireland currently can take up to 75% of inverter-based resources. So that includes wind and solar, as well as imports from interconnectors. I think that's important to emphasize. I think we always say wind and solar make up that 75%, but now we have more interconnecting capacity with the GB market that affects that limit as well. Ireland can take up to 75. It's really, really impressive for an island grid. I think it's one of the highest, if not the highest in the world. So I think we should really emphasize that a little bit more. But at the same time, I think it is important to maybe look at more of the local constraints. I think that's probably more, I wouldn't say easily addressed, but it's easier to kind of identify where the congested areas actually are, and whether it's building more, reinforcing the transmission grid over there, or adding storage. You can use storage as a transmission asset, and that has been done in other markets as well, to just reduce that congestion and making sure maybe you can store some of that excess solar when you can't take it on at a time and use it later. So smooth out that generation curve. So hopefully wasn't too convoluted.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because back to my point earlier on, I think we are seeing the step change happening. That when you see the likes of Turlock Hill being impacted, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, that it's being involved in the mix. It shows that step change is happening. It shows that the profile is moving, and it shows that hopefully demand is smoothing across the profile of a day, which means that our domestic level, we're charging our own cars from a domestic level PV through to your households, cooking, clean, whatever it's going to be from inside in the house. Demand profile is it's from where we were 10 years ago. It's drastically different. And I think in the next 10 years again, if we go forward to 2030 and 2035, I think we'll see that curve continue to evolve. In what direction we should see, but I think you're absolutely right. From a battery storage basis, from an infrastructure basis, evolution of that and growth of that is going to make interesting watching over the next number of years. It's in a very positive impact, I suspect. So
yes, I just want to add one more. I think especially for a lot of more households now with domestic solar, and I think then the next step would be maybe a lot of people, I think a lot of people are doing this, just to more smartly managing different types of consumption in the house. I think there's already the Beat the Peak program from ESB, but I think my background also, I worked in kind of the grid edge technology kind of market research before. So I think that this type of behavioral, nudging people to, switch the time they're doing laundry or cooking can work to a certain extent. And I do believe that the key change will come to actually automatically controlling or smartly managing different parts of the household or business consumption. And I think it's doable, especially when you have rooftop solar, maybe with storage, to really change that demand curve. But that automation and software piece is really key. Maybe it's still a few years from us, but I think it might not be as, it might be quite common already, especially for people who have rooftop solar, EVs, also considering already have a battery. So yeah, definitely can see a lot of that changing for certain households very quickly. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Faye. Andrew, I wouldn't mind just bringing you in, just talk a little bit about your, I guess, the previous project earlier on where we're case studying. One of the things that intrigued for me is you mentioned about the strategy deployed from a community engagement basis, to shield the horses from the point of view of the piling work was going on. But in a general sense, I guess the community engagement strategy you would have had from a start of development.
Yeah,
I suspect that's evolved a lot over time, and
it has. Now, to be fair, on this project, Bulstown, we acquired that project after it had planning, so we weren't involved in the initial, like imagine most developers now will be involved from start to finish, so they'd be involved in the pre-planning community liaison as well. Now, we had no involvement in that, but as far as I'm aware, that went fairly straightforward. There was no objections to the planning application, and it was actually granted by Meath County Council as opposed to an appeal to An Bord Pleanála. So it was successful on that front. But our strategy on community liaison, basically, we set up a website for each individual project. We deliver leaflets to anyone in the vicinity within a couple of kilometers or any along the transfer or the traffic route. A leaflet is just explaining the project, what's happening, and we also have employ the services of a community liaison officer who's in the area and calls to people who have concerns on that. And that's where we were made aware of the concerns regarding the traffic and the deliveries. People were at work. That's how, well, it was obviously, we knew it was going to be an issue, but just the extent of it and the amount of people who did have that worry on their minds about their kids not being able to cycle their bikes and that. So what we ended up doing in that front was our resident engineer on the site set up a WhatsApp group for the residents, and on a weekly basis, the intended delivery timetable was sent out to each of them, saying that on Monday morning there'll be 10 trucks coming along or 5 trucks coming over. Now, obviously, it's subject to change. Your deliveries change, things change, but it gave a rough idea of when deliveries were taking place, whether it was the morning or the afternoon, and what kind of trucks they were. Just to give people a heads up, because as I said, there was equestrian area, so people were coming to feed their horses, and they'd be parking at the side of the road with their trailers, and they could be causing blockages and that if an Arctic truck's trying to get down as well. So that worked quite successfully, actually. Between that and the community liaison engaging with the residents, it was no major issues, shall we say, arose during the construction.
That's good to hear. I think it obviously evolves over time, and there's a lot in it in terms of a lot more goes on behind it, of course, that we don't see. So I might just move on to the last slide, and we might pick up then the rest of the Q&A from the webinar. So look, just as a recap, we went through a massive amount of information there today. This, I guess, of course, we would all welcome you to join us again in October for the Solar Ireland conference with the seedlings we're building with Generations. On the 2nd of October in the RDS, action packed as the same as last year. We meet all of the key individuals in the market, from advisors, EBC contractors, through to all of those developers in the market, through to anyone you need to meet. It's the place to be. So by all means, go to the website. I'm sure Priscilla will be sending that around also afterwards again to all who attended the webinar, plus as well to the wider audience. Do register, and we hope to meet everyone there at the event. A great event last year, well turned out last year, and it was an immense event for the point of view of the growth of the industry. Again, I think we're going to see a lot more of the same theme again this time around. So we might jump into some of the Q&A we have there from this, and there's a few things I've seen come through. Actually, one or two more questions I have here myself. Actually, might pick up first before I go into the rest of the Q&A. I guess maybe you might go back to yourself, Faye, again, just for a point which is leading on some of the discussions we had, but one of the questions come in here. Look at the figures you have in this year's report. What would you say is the biggest sign that Ireland's solar sector has really shifted from plans on paper to megawatts on the ground? Once you're thinking about that, I guess it's interesting, the one we're kind of, as we're talking through the shift in profile. But I guess what are you seeing as the biggest sign that it's that change is now really happening?
I think there was a stretch where solar was generating more than wind. And that was, I think, when we first saw that happen, I think earlier, like a couple months ago. And I don't think that has ever happened before. And, when I talk about the Irish market, like obviously wind has been the main renewable source. So for certain stretches to actually have more solar than wind, or just the fact that when you look at it reached 1 gigawatt of solar, and now it's 1.7. So that, to talk to other people, when people are always surprised to find out how much growth there has been in the Irish market for solar. So yeah, I think that's a big sign when I saw the stretches of more solar generation than wind. And I do think that 20% of island demand met by solar at one point in time, that's quite an impressive figure. And also just the fact that when I make charts, when I started making these generation portfolio charts, and you really have to pick the brightest color for solar, and you might not even see it back in 2023. But now you don't even need the brightest color. It's quite clear. It's on the map.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of signs. I've just been, basically we have a newsletter that goes out every month. I think the most we want to write about and we can write about is solar, because there's like new records every month. For years to come now.
I guess what you hear, Andrew, maybe looking at the technology front, what are you seeing from a step change from procurement in technology? I'm kind of paraphrasing the question here, but are you seeing big step changes from the EPC contractors in the market being more confident, more competent, more industry coming in, more competition coming in? And
I think there's more competition. Like an issue we had at the start was there was no competition. We couldn't get contractors to build our projects. It was a struggle, and ones that were so now. But now, 3 or 4 years on, our list of our potential, we have a panel of a framework of contractors now, and it's deep. It's in double figures now, whereas 3 years ago it wasn't. So of course they're getting more experience now as well in Irish markets as well. Like we've projects in bogs and that, which probably they wouldn't have familiarity with from building in Spain or Portugal or whatever. So it's a learning curve for everyone. They're getting more experience in the Irish market, and we're getting more of them coming into the market. So it's positive on that front too.
Are you seeing shift in technology as well, that you're becoming more, for you in the procurement team, let's say, becoming more comfortable with certain types of technology, certain providers in the market, or just that maybe it's all evolving at the same pace and they're all competitive to each other?
Yeah, to be honest, that's not an area I'm too familiar with now, so I wouldn't become. But I know, like, obviously the technology is improving, the panels are getting stronger and that. So, but as for the ins and outs of that, I wouldn't know too much about that.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
I guess, look, there's a few points you just mentioned there, like just the competition, and just the evolution of the competence of the market. That's a big part that's going to play its part for us as a wider market to make sure that we achieve the targets we need to achieve. Because if we don't have that depth of resource in the market, we're at nothing in reality. And I think, to plug the conference again, we saw that last year. The amount of EPC contractors that wanted to attend and meet developers and meet people and meet advisors in the market was phenomenal when we shifted it to the RDS from a scale of an event, and that was really positive to see, because a lot of them are new entrants to the market. A lot of mainland European suppliers, I would say, the Spanish suppliers and the Spanish EPC contractors who are well used to delivering in those markets, less so in the Irish market, but establishing bases here and seeing that growth. And that's really encouraging to see. I think you'll see it from your perspective for sure in the market. So we have a couple of minutes left, unfortunately, but I guess you talked a bit earlier on around the community benefit elements as well, and how how the funding is used in the market as well. But has there been any for you over the last number of years on projects? Has there been any major learning curves in terms of dealing with this, in terms of process and evolution of it?
The one thing, as soon as, because we do mention the Community Benefit Fund when we launch our website, and we launched it's on the leaflet, but that's obviously 2 years or a year in advance of when the project's going to go live and the community benefit become active. So that's one thing I'd like to see, is that if the funds could be being released in advance of energization, maybe. We haven't done that yet, but that's something which maybe would be of benefit if people see money coming in before sites go live. And I think it's 13 months after it goes live is before technically you have to make your first payment. And
that's probably from feedback on the ground, I guess, really, Andrew, isn't it?
Because I guess I'd say 2 or 3, well, not 2 or 3 weeks, but 2 or 3 a month inquiries I'd get about, oh, when can I claim, or how do I claim, that kind of thing,
Yes.
or put in a claim for an application for a grant. That's quite common, yeah.
Okay, that's good. If I may, I might just for 1 minute before we wrap up, could we talk a little bit around the point you mentioned around the hybridization of projects as well, infrastructure. If you were rewriting a blank canvas from the data that you see right now of what does Ireland need to look like, you mentioned the SNSP of 75%, it's phenomenal, and it is, and compared to other markets. But if we were to redraw the grid in Ireland, what would you think it'd be?
That's a great question, and I'll give very unrealistic answers. And I think it is really important to, again, I think it's the same kind of hammering the previous point about really identifying where the most congested areas are, and to make sure that is supplied with hybrid generation, whether it's wind plus battery or solar plus battery. Understand that right now these hybrid assets might not be bankable in Ireland at this point, but it's not something it's completely technically feasible. It's more of the market incentives and structure that need to be in place to actually encourage the right kind of behavior from these assets where they're working together. I think because Ireland has experienced growth in wind and now is experiencing growth in solar, I think the next step is really to figure out how to harmonize all these assets together. And I think that comes down to maybe not, I do believe for a lot of the for grid operators on the island of Ireland, the technical expertise when it comes to physical infrastructure is really phenomenal. But maybe what has room for improvement is more of the software side, the IT side, because a lot of that harmonization will require very robust and reliable digital systems that actually are able to dispatch resources smartly. So I think one of the issues, for example, we're facing right now in the storage markets is the fact that storage assets are labeled as multi-fuel units in the market, so they cannot bid negative physical notification, which means they can't really tell the grid operator when they're charging. So it makes less reliable for the grid operators to believe their state of charge and how much they can rely on these assets. So this is just one issue when it comes to operating the grid. I think, like I said, we have all these assets and it needs to be harmonized. And the key point in that, maybe not, oh, we need to build here, we need to build there, more like what is the reliable, resilient digital infrastructure we can put in to actually make sure we can maximize the benefits from all these wonderful resources that are already deployed, ready to be used, but not optimized right now due to digital infrastructure insufficient parts. So I'll leave it at that.
That's a good answer to a tough question, so I'll let you go with that one. Folks, that's all we have time for, I'm afraid. Excellent having a conversation with both of you. Thank you very much for taking you through your parts of the presentation. It's as I say, just as a parting word, encouraging to see the growth of solar, encouraging to see the scale will continue, and the run rate was looking at from a domestic level and a growth level for utility and microgen and commercial, of course, as well. So it's the future is bright and the future is sunny. So go off and enjoy the sun. We shall leave it there, and thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.